The International Justice Summit in Geneva had drawn leaders, diplomats, and political figures from around the world. The air was heavy with formality, yet beneath the polished speeches and handshakes lay an undercurrent of tension. When Pam Bondi took the stage, her confidence radiated like a torch. With a smirk, she declared, "Without us, you have no law." Her words echoed across the hall, sharp and dismissive, intended not just for the audience but for one man in particular, Ibrahim Traoré. The young Burkinabe leader sat still, his military uniform neatly pressed, his gaze unyielding. Cameras panned to him instantly, viewers at home watching to see how Africa's most defiant voice would react. Bondi's statement had struck the nerve of sovereignty, dismissing decades of struggle and the blood shed for independence. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some applauded quietly, siding with Bondi's Western arrogance. Others frowned, sensing the insult masked as diplomacy. The world leaned closer to its screens, waiting for Traoré. When he rose, the room fell silent. His steps were deliberate, echoing through the chamber like a drumbeat of defiance. He faced Bondi directly, his expression steady, neither angered nor shaken. In a voice calm but cutting, he replied, "Then justice was never yours." The words landed like a strike. Delegates shifted uncomfortably. Some scribbled notes, others raised their phones to capture the moment. Bondi froze for a second, her smirk faltering as Traoré's voice carried further, "Law without justice is not law, it is control. And Africa will not be controlled." The hall erupted, some in applause, others in outrage. What had started as a summit had transformed into a battlefield of words, and Traoré had fired the first true shot. Pam Bondi recovered her composure quickly, refusing to let Traoré's words dominate the room. She leaned forward at the podium, her voice sharpened like a blade, "Spare me the lectures, Mr. Traoré. Without international order, your nations would collapse into chaos. You preach sovereignty, yet your people still look to us for aid, for guidance, for the very definition of justice." Her statement was calculated, both to undermine Traoré's credibility and to reinforce the Western narrative of dependency. Some delegates nodded in approval, clinging to the belief that Africa's rise was only possible under Western shadow. But Traoré did not flinch. He adjusted the microphone with measured calm, his eyes scanning the chamber as though to gather the silent voices of those who had been overlooked for too long. "Chaos," he repeated, his voice steady. "Our nations did not collapse because we lacked order. They were made unstable by interventions, by coups sponsored, by resources stolen under the guise of law. And now you call that justice?" Gasps filled the room. Some delegates turned their heads toward Bondi, others scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Cameras zoomed in. Viewers across the world witnessing a clash not only between two individuals but between two visions of global power. Traoré's tone grew sharper, yet still disciplined. "If justice is yours, then why has it never been served to those who enslaved, colonized, and plundered us? If law is yours, then why has it always bent to protect the powerful and punish the weak? No, justice belongs to the people. And the people of Africa have chosen to stand." The chamber erupted again, this time louder, the applause rivaling the shouts of disapproval. Bondi's smile thinned, her authority challenged in front of the world. For the first time, she realized this was no mere debate, it was a reckoning. Pam Bondi tightened her jaw, determined not to let Traoré's words linger without rebuttal. She leaned closer into her microphone, her voice carrying sharpness across the chamber. "Mr. Traoré, don't twist history to suit your rhetoric. The international community has built institutions to protect order and human rights. Without them, Africa would still be lost in tribal conflicts, unable to govern itself." Her words landed like a stone. The chamber grew tense, some Western delegates nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably at the bluntness of her claim. But Traoré did not hesitate. He raised his head high, his gaze unwavering. "Govern itself," he repeated, his tone icy. Africa governed itself for thousands of years before a single European ship ever touched our shores. Our empires thrived, our trade routes connected continents, our systems of law preserved harmony. What ended that? Colonization. Exploitation. Slavery. And now you stand here claiming we needed saving? The silence was broken by murmurs, applause rising from the African bloc. Cameras captured Traoré's face illuminated with conviction, his voice carrying across millions of screens worldwide. He continued, striking with precision, "The institutions you mention, whose interests have they served? When African leaders demand justice, they are sanctioned. When resources are stolen, the thieves are protected. And when we rise to reclaim our dignity, we are labeled as threats. That is not order, that is control." Bondi shifted in her seat, her smirk fading into a tight line. For the first time, she seemed unsettled, her narrative cracking under the weight of Traoré's words. The moderator's gavel struck to restore order, but it was clear, the battle lines had been drawn, and the world was watching. Bondi's face flushed slightly, but she forced a smile, her tone now sharper, defensive yet condescending. "Mr. Traoré, you speak of dignity and history, but the present demands accountability. The nations you praise have struggled because of corruption and instability within. How many times has aid been misused? How many leaders have clung to power while their people suffered? Do not place all the blame on us." The words hung heavy, intended as a blow, a final attempt to undercut his credibility. But Traoré leaned forward, his voice rising with power, drawing the eyes of every delegate. "Corruption," he said, his voice slicing through the chamber. "Who fuels that corruption? Who arms dictators? Who pays for stolen resources at unfair prices, then lectures us about justice? Every crime committed by weak leaders was enabled by powerful ones outside this continent. We are not blind, we see the hands behind the curtain." The African delegation erupted in applause, joined by scattered claps from South American and Asian representatives. Even some European delegates shifted uneasily, their silence a quiet acknowledgement of truth. Traoré's words struck deeper still as he raised his hand, pointing directly at Bondi. "Justice is not something you deliver, it is something we build for ourselves. You said without you we have no law. Then I say this, if justice depends on you, then it was never justice at all. Because true justice cannot be given by those who benefit from our suffering." Bondi opened her mouth to reply but found none. Her smirk was gone, replaced by a look that betrayed both frustration and the dawning realization that her usual arguments were crumbling. The moderator struggled again to quiet the chamber, but by now, the momentum belonged to Traoré. The air was thick, charged with the sense that history was shifting in real time. The moderator finally regained control of the room, his gavel echoing like thunder. "Order. We must continue with respect." But respect was no longer the point, it was power. And in that moment, it was clear who held it. Traoré stood taller, his voice steady yet carrying the weight of an entire continent. "For decades, we have been lectured about democracy, about law, about freedom, always by those who refuse to let us live them fully. But Africa is awake now. We will not wait for permission. We will not ask for approval. And we will not bow to those who profit from our pain." His words rolled across the hall like a storm. Delegates leaned forward in their seats, journalists scribbled furiously, knowing headlines were being written in real time. Pam Bondi, shifting in her chair, attempted a reply. "And what happens when you fail? When your so-called independence collapses without support from us?" Traoré's response was swift, his gaze locked onto hers. "Then we fail standing on our feet, not kneeling at your table. But let me tell you this, we are not failing. We are building, we are uniting, and the world is watching. What you call collapse, we call rebirth." The audience erupted. Applause, chants, and even the pounding of fists on tables filled the chamber. Cameras zoomed in on Bondi, her composure cracking under the pressure, while Traoré looked calm, resolute, and immovable. It was not just a debate anymore, it was a declaration. And Traoré had delivered it with the conviction of a man who knew history was on his side. The energy in the hall was electric. Cameras captured every word, every glance. For millions watching live, this was no longer just a debate, it was a clash of two worlds. Pam Bondi straightened her shoulders, refusing to back down. You speak of rebirth, Mr. Traoré, but without our institutions, your systems will collapse into chaos. Law, order, progress, these come from us. Without us, you have nothing but slogans. Her words dripped with condescension, and for a moment the air felt tense, like a blade drawn from its sheath. Traoré didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his voice calm but cutting like steel. If justice can be taken away when it no longer serves you, then it was never justice. If laws are used as chains, then they are not laws, they are tools of control. And if progress means dependency, then we reject it. Africa's foundation is not built on your approval, it is built on the strength of its people. The crowd roared again. Delegates from across Africa rose to their feet, clapping, some even chanting Traoré's name. Journalists whispered to each other, "This is history. This is the moment the balance shifts." Bondi's face stiffened. She forced a smile, but the tension in her eyes betrayed her. Traoré had flipped the script, he wasn't defending Africa against her accusations. He was indicting the very system she represented. And the world was listening. The moderator tried to regain control of the debate, but the energy in the room was slipping from formality into something more raw, more transformative. Cameras zoomed in on the faces of the audience, young Africans watching with fire in their eyes, diplomats shifting nervously, and world leaders silently calculating what Traoré's words meant for the future. Pam Bondi adjusted her mic, her tone sharpened like a prosecutor. Strong speeches don't build nations, Mr. Traoré. Without structure, without oversight, you'll fall into corruption, instability, and failure. That's what history shows us. But Traoré's reply came fast, like a hammer striking steel. History also shows us this. The greatest instability came when outsiders imposed their oversight. Corruption thrived not because of Africa, but because of the deals forced upon it. We are rewriting history now, and this time, it is ours to write. The applause thundered again, shaking the hall. Viewers online flooded social media with quotes from Traoré. Hashtags demanding sovereignty trended globally. Bondi forced a laugh, but the camera caught the flicker of unease across her face. She had entered this stage confident she would dominate. Instead, she was now part of a moment that slipped beyond her control, a moment owned by the African voice rising through Traoré. Pam Bondi leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, her voice carrying the authority of a courtroom closing argument. Mr. Traoré, you speak as if sovereignty alone feeds children, builds schools, and secures justice. Without alliances, without guidance, nations crumble. And Africa, your Africa, cannot stand without us. The hall grew tense. Diplomats shifted in their seats, some nodding in silent agreement, others watching Traoré intently, as if waiting for a lightning strike. The camera zoomed in on him, catching the faintest smile, confident, unshaken. Traoré's reply landed like a drumbeat, and yet, despite all your guidance, hunger remains, injustice remains, and dependency remains. If alliances mean kneeling, if guidance means chains, then no, Africa does not need it. We rise not because of you, but in spite of you. The audience erupted. Young Africans in the crowd stood and applauded, their voices echoing, "Africa rises. Africa rises." The sound carried across the hall, bouncing against marble walls and into cameras broadcasting worldwide. Pam Bondi tried to speak again, but her words were drowned out by the sheer force of the moment. She glanced around, realizing the debate had slipped away from her hands. What she thought would be her stage had become his. The thunder of applause began to subside, but its echoes lingered in the air like a storm refusing to leave. Pam Bondi gripped the podium tighter, forcing a smile that looked more like a mask than confidence. She raised her voice, determined to regain ground. You inspire with words, but inspiration alone will not keep order. Without law, without structure, nations collapse into chaos. That is why leaders like you must accept guidance. The words might have carried weight in another room, another time. But here, with the world watching and Africa's youth hanging on every word, they sounded like an old script read aloud on a new stage. Traoré straightened his uniform, letting the silence hang before he spoke. His eyes locked on Bondi, his tone calm but cutting. Law without justice is nothing but control. Structure without freedom is another word for chains. And guidance that comes with conditions is not guidance, it is domination. You call this law. We call it theft of dignity. A collective gasp filled the hall. Diplomats shifted uncomfortably, some hiding smirks, others scribbling notes as cameras zoomed in on Traoré's face. The African delegates rose, their applause deafening, their voices chanting in unison, "Justice! Justice! Justice!" Pam Bondi's composure faltered. For the first time in her career, she seemed smaller than the stage she stood on. The very energy she sought to control had slipped away, and Traoré's voice, firm, defiant, unbreakable, became the heartbeat of the room. As the chanting quieted, all eyes returned to Ibrahim Traoré. He stepped forward, his voice no longer just addressing Pam Bondi but the entire assembly, and the millions watching around the world. For too long, we were told we needed someone else's law to survive, someone else's system to breathe, someone else's permission to rise. But today, Africa speaks for itself. Justice is not imported, it is born from the people. And the people have already chosen, we will stand free, we will stand proud, and we will never bow again. The hall erupted. Reporters rushed to capture the moment. Bondi lowered her gaze, her final words swallowed by the thunder of applause. African youth in the gallery waved flags, chanting Traoré's name, their voices echoing far beyond the walls of the summit. For the world, it was a reminder. For Africa, it was a declaration. And for Traoré, it was a promise, that no matter who tried to mock, control, or silence them, the spirit of freedom would always roar louder. Let history remember this moment. Africa does not wait for validation, nor does it beg for permission. We do not measure our worth by the words of outsiders, but by the strength of our people and the justice we carry in our hearts. You tried to tell us that without you, there is no law. But today, the world has seen that justice was never yours to give, and freedom was never yours to take. From this day forward, Africa stands taller, louder, and freer than ever before. And no one, no government, no foreign voice, will silence us again.